Welcome, guys, to another Party Time Talk. This is the first time we've been able to have a guest on Party Time and be able to talk to them about what they do. So I've got Mitch Hauschildt right here, athletic trainer at Missouri State. You do so many things, or involved in so much. So just give us kind of a general overview of what you do at the university, and then all the other things you do in terms of your teaching and all
Sure.
that.
Yeah. So Mitch Hauschildt, work at Missouri State University. So I'm the prevention, rehab, and physical performance coordinator there. So I'm in charge of our injury prevention strategies for the athletic department. So we got 17 sports, about 430 student athletes. And then I'm the rehab coordinator for the athletic department as well. So just trying to make sure everybody, if they do get injured, gets out on the court or the field again as quickly as possible. And then outside of that, I've taught for a bunch of different companies over the years. Started way back in the day for like Woodway treadmills, and then started teaching for TRX and Ultimate Sandbag, and all that's kind of led me to the last few years. Been teaching a lot for Rock Tape, and now Master Dry Needling. Also sprinkle some stuff in for PESI education here and there. So yeah, just always kind of balancing a lot of different plates, but I enjoy that. So
Yeah, awesome. So you work at Missouri State. Brett went to Missouri State. You were one of Brett's early on mentors, and Brett uses all sorts of tools and everything else, but he would have had to get that from someone along his career path. And I know
Sure.
you've taught for a bunch of different companies. You're the rehab coordinator. You use a bunch of different tools and everything, and I think that probably ties into your overall general philosophy on how you treat people. For you personally, why do you tend to either get involved or are very curious about all the different things that are out there for treating people, like the rock tape, the rock blades, the kinesiology tape, needling now, BFR you've been using?
Right.
What, deep down, what made you want to just continue to keep learning and use more tools as they come out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a curiosity thing, right? And you guys are the same way. There's got to be better, more efficient ways to do things, and technology is great, and it's fun to discover and try new things. And I think that is actually one of the biggest benefits I've had of teaching is what you kind of find is you get in a little bit of some of these circles where you meet other people that are out teaching as well that are really bright. You learn stuff from them, and then they've got a touch point with a different company that has a new product, and then they kind of connect you. You start asking, and so I tend to get exposed to a lot of different things, which I think is a ton of fun and keeps me fresh. But for me, it's just a matter of how do we get from point A to point B faster, more efficiently, and every day we're finding new things and learning new things as an industry. And especially if you're going to work in a college setting, I don't care what level you're at, what school you're at, the expectation is that you're going to do things at a high level. And so I like to do things at a high level for them because that is the expectation, but that's also the expectation I have for myself. With that being said, there's so much translation to kind of whether you call them normal people or non-athletes or general population. Everybody sort of assumes that high-end athletes don't have the same dysfunction as everybody else does. And the reality is they have the same, and maybe even worse, right?
Sure.
Because they have bad habits, but they tend to just cover it up a little bit better than other people do. So it makes it challenging but fun at the same time. And I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy trying new tools, new things. But the reality is the human body is the human body, and it's just a matter of finding what is the right tool in that moment at that time, right? So not everybody should be needled. Not everybody, I shouldn't use my blades on everybody or cups or BFR or whatever, right? And so mixing and matching and finding the right tool, the right sequence, the right order for those is really the key, in my opinion.
Yeah. Have you ever looked back or thought back on how you treated people or the way you use certain tools 5, 10, 15 years ago and look back and be like, ooh,
Oh,
why was I doing
heck yeah.
that?
Like embarrassed. Like, what was I doing? The first one that comes to mind, I always remember, so way back when, before I started the university, I was in a private hospital-based rehab setting. So we had rehab and sports performance. And at that point, we were doing a lot of high-speed treadmill training for performance training and with high school, college athletes. And I loved it. We were having a lot of fun. We were training athletes at a high level, doing some pretty cool, innovative stuff at the time. And I remember we had some firefighters from Springfield walk in the door, and they were like, yeah, we're firefighters, but actually we're training for the National Firefighter Challenge. And we want to be better. We want to win worlds. They were like top 5 in the world the year before. And they're like, we want to win worlds. They were really good. And that challenge, I don't remember all of it. It was like, it's basically like a 2-minute deal where it's like an obstacle course, and they have to hit it with a sledgehammer and drag a dummy, and they have to pull a rope or a hose up 3 stories and climb a bunch of stairs. Like, there's a whole sequence to this obstacle course, and it's all for time. So I'm like, let's do it. So we started training them, and I remember thinking, man, we need to really get them fit. A lot of metabolic training, and man, let's put them on the treadmill. And I remember putting them on the treadmill for like 2-minute bouts, just thinking, let's get them like anaerobic, lactate,
build the lactate
training. Oh yeah. And I didn't fully grasp the accumulation effect of running uphill at elevation. So what I mean by that is, we would run athletes at the time for 4, 5, 6, maybe 8 seconds at anywhere from 20 to 35% elevation. High speed, high elevation training.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like, well, they can't do that, but let's go 15%. Well, if you think about it, for 2 minutes, the number of steps they were taking at 15% elevation at the speeds I was doing, I was crushing them. And they would come in every treadmill day and they would throw up. And I was like, these guys aren't soft, but I just didn't know what I was doing. I was like 25 years old, and I didn't understand all those things. So, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But to me, if you aren't doing those things, if you don't look back and are a little bit embarrassed about some of the things you were doing, then you're not out on the edge. You're not putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you hear people that publish books and videos and content online. It's like, if you don't look back at some of the early stuff you did and were embarrassed, then you waited too long.
Yeah.
And so I feel the same way with therapy, right? If I don't look back and go, dang, I wish I would have done things differently, then either A, I'm not learning, or B, I wasn't willing to put myself out there and I was constantly safe. Well, if we're constantly safe, we're not evolving and finding the next cool thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I recently, I mean, I'm fairly young in my career right now, but I recently had an experience where I did my graduate assistantship at Missouri Western.
Mm-hmm.
Well, recently in the clinic, I've had 3 of those football guys that I used to treat at the university that I now saw as patients here.
Sure, yeah.
And I do things
Oh, yeah.
so much differently.
Right.
And I just remembered the things that I did with them, the way I, did dry needling or instrument-assisted stuff or the rehabs and everything. And I just looked back and thought back on how I did them. And then I see them come in with basically similar issues to what they had back in college. I just didn't have a great way of treating it or didn't fully grasp it. And I mean, I'll probably still look back in another 5 years and look back at what I did with them this last month and be like, what the heck was I doing?
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where I think that shows a little bit of growth and maturity if you can look back at yourself and just be a little bit embarrassed or just look back and be like, I could have done better, or there are better things to
well, and if you think about it too, we look at other parts of our industry and it's natural, right? So you look back 20 years ago, we weren't doing a bunch of hip scopes, right? And if we do, the success rate was awful.
Yeah,
or you look at some of the previous ways that people have had they thought, at one point they thought the best thing to use for an ACL graft was Gore-Tex. That's an awful idea. In hindsight, you're like, we were stupid. Why didn't we think that was a good idea? But at the time, it seemed brilliant. Or the other one, I remember back in right around 2000, so this is showing my age a little bit, But I was in grad school and I worked. I did an internship with the New York Yankees organization.
Yeah.
And at that point, Dr. James Andrews was doing the thermal capsular shrinkage on the shoulder capsule for pitchers.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, this thing is amazing. This is how we're going to do every shoulder repair going forward. 2 years later, everybody was sprinting from it. Like, this is the worst thing ever because they all failed.
Yeah.
But we look at those things and be like, yeah, that's just the evolution of medicine, right? But for some reason, when we're in the middle of it, we feel stupid, right? Or we feel like we failed somebody. We didn't fail anybody. It just, we learned over time. And, you know, in the rock tape world, we always talk about ancora imparo, and it just means still learning, right? That's one of our mantras that we talk about.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, if you retake one of my courses 5 years from now, I hope it looks very different than it does today, because that means we're looking at the new latest research and we're coming up with new ideas and new ways to apply tape or cups or whatever else. So you have to. Hopefully you do.
Yeah. Definitely. Right now, currently, in your practice and the way you're treating all of your college athletes, what are some recent tools you've come across or ways of training them that you have found to be big game changers for them? Anything new lately that you've been doing?
I mean, for me, and I feel like I'm a little late to this party, but I'm really into BFR right now. And there's a few reasons why I was a little late to the party that I won't get into, but just, you know, accessibility, things like that. But we have it accessible now, you know, and been working with a newer company, but I've really been diving into the research and it's got me excited. And we've known for a while that BFR is good for like muscle hypertrophy and strength gains. And so, those are there, but where I'm excited is we're learning in the research about some pretty interesting alternative uses for pain control, for activation. There's actually some pretty crazy research that's coming out using BFR with adult populations. So I'll define adult as like 50 to 70, and the ability to improve brain cognition. Yeah. Right. And so you start looking at some of those kinds of things, and that's not my direct patient population, but there's things that we can, there's ways we can apply that to even the younger population. So that's been really intriguing for me. You know, the last couple of years, I've really been on a rabbit hole of dry needling and just doing tons of dry needling and figuring out how we do that better. And, you know, all the different, you know, whether it's the variables, whether it's size of the needle or time or using stem or changing body positions. There's just so many different dynamics we can use with that. Yeah. So those are probably the two that I've been into the most in the last couple of years, but still using all of our other kind of more traditional techniques. Yeah,
for sure. You mentioned earlier about how, I mean, there's a bunch of access to different tools, and it's all about finding the right combinations and the tools that work well for each individual. Any general tips for anyone who has access to a lot of tools and just trying to figure out what works with people, or is it kind of just use them, learn, figure it out as you go?
So, well, there's never going to be a replacement for education. And so I will always, and of course I consider myself an educator first and foremost, but there's never going to be a replacement for education, right? So I first started using instrument assisted tools 15 plus years ago. I ordered a $30 set of tools off of Amazon, plastic washout tools, and I just started scraping the crap out of people. Yeah. And I thought it was great. And looking back on it, I just beat people up and didn't really know what I was doing, and but seemed to be getting at least some results. And then it wasn't until years later when I actually was able to take some good education that I was like, wow, there's actually a lot more to this. And so I always want to encourage people to just get educated, take education courses rather than, yes, I want you to try new things. Yeah. You know, I always tell people that when they take a course from me, they're probably, the advantage they're getting is, you know, the 1 out of 100 things I've tried, they are saving themselves the 99 things. That's why they're paying me. But I still think if we can gather information from others to help guide us, that's the big thing. With that being said, with all the tools, right? And man, like when I walk into your guys' clinic, you guys have all the tools, right? You have more than we have at the university. And I don't have all the maces, and I don't have all the size of kettlebells you guys have, and all like you guys have all. And it's fun, right? It's fun when we talk shop because I'm like, yeah, this is super cool. And one of the things I love about Brad is he's never been afraid to invest in new stuff and try new tools, right? Okay. But when I look at any tool, to me, at this stage of my career, any of the tools we use are really just a handle into the nervous system, right? So we're just trying to grasp the brain. You know, as Eric Cobb always says, with Z Health, we're always training neurology many times by mistake. We don't realize we're training the brain, but we always are, whether that's through exercise, whether that's through massage or stretching or needling or whatever. We're always just training the nervous system and manipulating it to do what we want it to do.
Yeah.
So when we look through that lens and we say everything's neurology, then every tool just becomes the handle. And so then the driver of what we do and what tools we use becomes what's our desired outcome, right? So the desired outcome, what's the end goal? If my end goal is I want them to be stronger, more stable, then if I back it up 5 steps or 8 steps or whatever it is from where they are now, what do I have to get there and what's my most efficient route? And so like, to use an example, I can tap into the nervous system with my manual therapy, with a floss band, a cup, my instrument-assisted tools with dry needling, with massage, with tape. I can tap into the nervous system really easily through the skin with all of those.
Yeah.
But they're not all appropriate for everybody. So now I just have to figure out, in that situation, will they benefit more from decompression versus compression? If it's decompression, I want my cups. If it's compression, I want floss bands. If I want to get really fast and really intense and they're up for it, I might try needles. If they're like, you know what, I don't need to go that aggressive, or I'm not quite ready for that, or I have a needle phobia, then I'm going to go, maybe I'll scrape on that with some tools. So it just becomes, what are all the variables here? And then what tool fits that person the best for that situation with the end goal in mind of whatever that is.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And that ties into a question I wanted to ask you. So I remember Brett convinced me, this is before I even graduated undergrad, to take one of your courses, the neurofacilitation movement course.
Yeah.
And in that course, that was like the first talk I'd ever heard about the importance of understanding the role the nervous system plays in just human movement, pain, and everything else. And in that course, I think you hit pretty heavy on how to interact with all the mechanoreceptors in the skin, which then directly tie into the nervous system and how human movement works and everything. And that kind of got my brain started on, maybe there's more than just the physical muscle or structure, ligament.
More than just meat, right?
Right, there's more than just meat. And so that was really interesting because in that talk, it wasn't about, hey, this is how you treat people. It was, hey, here are some really broad general concepts. Let these help guide how you treat people with all the tools you have access to. And then I think you also had another quote, which I'm sure you probably got from
somebody, right? Yeah.
But it's like you have to understand the rules well before you break the rules.
Yeah.
And I think like what you just discussed there was like that's part of it.
Yeah.
You understand.
Well, rules are meant to be broken, right?
Yes.
No matter anywhere in life, right? They're meant to be broken, but you don't get to break the rules until you understand how to follow the rules. And I tell my kids that all the time. I'm like, they're always like, why do we have to do things this way? I'm like, listen, I don't make the rules. We're just going to follow them until we get to the point where maybe it's appropriate for us to break the rules. Yeah. But, so when I'm teaching somebody a new concept or a new tool, I give them a specific framework. These are the rules. Stay within those rules until you get super confident. Yeah. And then you can start dabbling a little bit. And that's where the fun happens, right? Then you can start to own it and make your own. I'll never forget that the very first day I got hired out of graduate school, I got hired by a doctor Bernie Griesmer, sports medicine pediatrician. And the very first day he hired me, he looked at me, he goes, I don't care what you do, just don't screw up. And I remember thinking, like at the time I was intimidated. I'm like, gosh, I'm not sure what that means, but okay. And looking back on it, it was one of the best things I ever did because I ever had was him as an employer. Because basically what he said to me was, go do whatever you want to do, but don't kill anybody. But through that play, through that willingness to experiment, and me not having somebody over top of me saying, you always have to do things a certain way, I was allowed the freedom to learn on my own and experiment. And that's where we found the really cool, groundbreaking stuff, right? And so, back to the whole thing of neurology and training the brain, I still think there's so many things about the brain I don't understand, we don't understand. I mean, it's so complex. But, even back in my early career, I remember always saying, well, we're really training nervous system. And I was correct in that statement, but I didn't even fully grasp it. At the time, I was thinking about, well, really what we're trying to do is recruit more motor units at the right rate to get more power output or a desired outcome. This whole concept of fascial system and different receptors and the things that we're doing now, like that was so far out in the distance. But it's been an evolution, and it's going to continue to evolve. And I think, and I had this discussion with a guy that I've gotten to know here just recently a little bit. We're talking actually about BFR. And he's a strength coach with a professional rugby team in Australia. And we're just talking about tendons, because we're talking about why does BFR seem to help with tendon pain so much? Why if you put BFR on somebody who's got a tendinopathy and you load them with a light load, why are we getting good results? Because the traditional research is telling us we load them heavy, right? That's how we get tendons to respond, is heavy, heavy load. But we're getting the same or better results with BFR with a really light load. Why is that? And, where we're landing right now without a lot of information is, I'm wondering if we're on the front end with tendons like we were 15 years ago with fascia, right? So when I went through school, fascia is the white packing material, holds everything together. Now we know it can contract, it tells us where a body is in space, it can feed the brain with all kinds of information. It's so important, so valuable that the fascia dictates a lot of what we do. I'm almost wondering now if we're going to start to see in the research similar things with tendons, that it's not just connective tissue that responds to load. Like maybe we can manipulate it other ways, right? And maybe that's why it responds well to needling in a lot of cases, because there's other properties in there we're starting to discover. So anyway, those are the kinds of things that get me excited. And we start thinking about, is there a new way that we could be treating tendinopathy, for example, that we haven't been doing, that our patients tolerate better, we get faster results, and it works well for them.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I don't want to keep us on here forever, but I do have one last question.
Okay.
And so you mentored Brett in his undergrad.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
He was one of my early students at Missouri State. Yeah. So we've known each other 15 years. Something like that.
For a while now. Yeah. Knowing what Brett is doing now with opening up his own practice as an athletic trainer in Kansas City and doing what he's doing, when you had him as a student, were there any qualities he had or things about his personality where you're like, this guy's pretty intense but could go someplace with what he's doing?
It's interesting.
Or like, what was he like as an, because I've known him for 8 years. So
right. So it's actually an interesting question. I love Brett to death. I've always considered him a good friend. But Brett also has his intricacies, right? Sure. And I think he's an acquired taste for someone. I don't think he would take that negatively. I think he would agree with that statement. Yeah. I actually encouraged him to open his own practice probably 5 years before he did. Yeah. Because he was just searching for what's the right fit. He worked in some hospitals and some high schools and some different places, he was just really struggling to find like what's the right spot for me.
Yeah.
And then a couple times I think he found what he thought was going to be the good spot, and then it just didn't work out for one reason or another. And I finally just said, like, dude, for you to be happiest, you need to control your own environment and control your own destiny and go hustle. And I always knew Brett's a really good clinician. I could never, ever debate that. And it was just a matter of finding the right fit for him, personality-wise, and something that he felt passionate about and wanted to chase. And this gig where he gets to do his own thing and write the own rules, that's a perfect fit for him.
It's exactly where it needs to be.
Yeah, because it's just personality-wise, it's where he needs to be, and so I'm proud of him for doing it, because not a lot of people are doing it, and you and I have talked about that. Like, there's just not a lot of athletic trainers that are sticking their neck out. We're seeing more, which I think is exciting.
Yeah.
I want to see more of it. I want to see more ATCs that are willing to put themselves out there and create their own environment, their own clinic. But we're told we can't do that, unfortunately, in a lot of our programs. So hopefully we can continue to expand it and broaden that scope a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks,
and joining us.
Love it.
Having guests on this has been something ever since we started doing this, I want to get more people on here just to hear other perspectives, because it's always good to keep things fresh. So, last thing, how would people go about following you on social media or whatever?
So most of my content I'm putting out now is on Instagram. So at Mitch Hauschildt on Instagram, and but also Maximum Training Solutions is my website. YouTube is Maximum Training. But yeah, look me up on Instagram, Facebook. Probably the easiest place to get a hold of me, and where most of my content is at this point, seems to be the easiest platform to get it out to a whole bunch of people. But then, if they're looking for courses, they can reach out to me there or on my website. Really, primarily right now, I'm teaching for rock tape and master time needling, and some for PESI education. And then I've got a couple new things that I'm working on right now that are going to be exciting, but I'm not quite ready to formally announce those. So
yeah, cool,
awesome.
Well,
thanks, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Yeah.